Dr. Liesl Folks is one of our speakers today, who currently serves as the provost at the University of Arizona, as well as a professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering. She holds a PhD in physics from University of Western Australia and an MBA from Cornell University. Previously, she performed research and development on nanoscale magnetic materials and devices in the support of data storage industry for 16 years in Silicon Valley, and has served as the president of the IEEE Magnetic Society from 2013 to 2014, was the first female president. Our next presenter that I'll introduce is Dr. Colleen Harrigan, who is an associate professor of anthropology and science, technology, and society at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. She is a feminist anthropologist of science, technology, and society. She investigates the historical and cultural dimensions of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, with a particular emphasis on computer science and engineering, and why these high status fields appear impervious to desegregation. She holds a PhD and MA in social cultural anthropology from the University of Washington. And then our third speaker is Dr. Lorraine Tumel-Berhalter, and is an associate professor and director of community translational research in the Jacobs School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences, Department of Family Medicine. She is an epidemiologist by training. She has over 25 years experience in conducting community-based participatory research and health disparities research to improve the patient-provider interface among underserved communities in chronic disease, self-management, and cancer prevention. As director of community engagement team at the UV Clinical and Translational Science Institute, she is committed to building infrastructure to facilitate community engagement and community partnered research. We are so happy to have all of these distinguished speakers here today, and we'll be passing the presentation off to them.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Bree, so much for hosting us today. And thank you all of you for being here. I'm just going to share my screen right now so we can move forward with our presentation.
All right, yes, thank you so much for having us. What we wanted to do today is talk about our NAVIGATE project, which is a case study approach to overcoming barriers to advancement for women in STEM. So I'm going to start by just giving you a little bit of an overview of the larger project that we're going to be talking about. So women continue to encounter bias in STEM disciplines, which deters them from achieving their career objectives. So what this project did was really aimed to help women not only identify, but also have strategies to move past gender-based barriers. So we utilized the case study method for training women graduate students to recognize and navigate these complex issues in their disciplines. So the training materials are available for use. There's no charge to them, and I will, on the next slide, show you where you can access them. So next slide, please. There we go. Okay, so this, the NAVIGATE project website is within the University at Buffalo's overall website. And we can see here, it tells you a little bit about the study, but it also has a tab specifically for the case studies. So this project was funded by NSF and to develop this training program. And again, the most important thing here is it's not only to acknowledge or to identify, but to address all the issues that people are facing, and specifically on gender-based inequity, bias, and discrimination. So these case studies are based on real experiences, real people, and there's some details that have been changed just to maintain confidentiality. But these are real world people who are willing to share their experiences and have had lesson plans developed around them so that we can use those experiences to help others avoid them or curtail them when they start to witness some of the same types of behavior. So with that, and again, they're free. You can download any of the case studies that you'd like to download. Okay, Colleen, I'll pass it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lorraine. So here's what we're going to be doing together today. In the chat, Sarah has provided a link to our facilitation guide that also contains the script. So what we're going to be sharing with you today is an actual Navigate case. And we want to have you get a taste of what it's like to be a graduate student who has been historically underrepresented in fields of STEM, who are using this case to try to navigate their career. But first, what we do in our workshops is we go over some research regarding bias and discrimination, and we'll share a couple of back pocket research studies that you can use as well for those people who are still in disbelief that there's a problem here in STEM. And we'll go over a few key concepts that are embedded in the case itself, so you can start recognizing them as they unfold in the everyday life of a STEM workplace. We'll also show you some shortcuts that happen when people make snap judgments and make mistakes in evaluative settings. And then we'll have some activities. We'll read the case together, and then you'll break out into small groups to discuss them with some guided questions. Then we'll come back together as a large group and we'll report out and do some group analysis. We'll put you back into small groups so you can help Michelle, who's the protagonist of this case, do some short-term strategic planning about what needs to happen in the coming months. And then we'll come back together as a large group so we can help Michelle plan for the rest of her career, and some good strategies for being savvy about navigating sometimes hostile workplace. And then we'll wrap up. Lisa will lead us in a wrap up of the overview of the Navigate case and get your feedback on what you think about these tools. So this is a case study that I wrote based on some ethnographic data that I collected a few years ago. And so, as Laureen mentioned, it is based in a real woman's experience navigating her career as an academic faculty member. So what we tell our students in the workshops is that you are going to encounter people who may not believe you when you say that there is such thing as bias. So we have two very well-known public, highly regarded studies that we recommend that change agents in STEM use to initiate people into the knowledge of bias and discrimination in STEM. The first is Stein Press, a 1999 study where they sent over 250 CVs or resumes to highly regarded faculty members in science. And each of these, they sent half of the resumes with female names on them and half the resumes had male names on them. The significant piece to know is that the resumes are exactly the same except for the names. And what they found is that the male applicants was rated higher in all categories of evaluation and more likely to be hired. And very significantly, the pattern of discrimination held for both women faculty members and male faculty members. So it seems that there's some internalized sexism that women have, and sometimes unconsciously may reproduce bias against women in women in science. So a few years later, about 13 years later, Mosner Rasmussen and her colleagues were like, well, maybe people are more likely to discriminate against their colleagues rather than their students. Maybe they're more generous towards their students. So they reproduced this study in a similar way. They had a CV for a graduate student lab manager, and they sent out the same CV with half with male names, half female names to research scientists in research intensive universities. Unfortunately, very significantly, males rated much more highly in terms of competency, were more likely to be hired. And as an insight into how the wage gap gets reproduced, they were willing to pay the male candidate $4,000 more for this this position, which was under $35,000. So it was quite a significant, about 20% more pay than they were going to offer the female candidate. And again, this sexism was reproduced by both women scientists and male scientists as well. Oops. So if you wouldn't mind looking at the facilitation guide, we have on pages 7 and 8 these key concepts defined for us all. But I'm just going to go through them briefly in the interest of time, because I'm sure that most of you are already aware of these issues, but want to make sure that we all have a common language framework for which to discuss our case today. So gender bias simply is when men or women are treated differently in a way that's unfair, but also with differential outcomes. So the impacts of gender bias can start to snowball and continue and hurt not just women individually, but women collectively in terms of contributing to science. And it's a form of sexism, which is discrimination based on gender, and the belief that one gender is superior to another gender and therefore more deserving of accolades, money, resources, opportunity, and respect. Unexamined bias is a form of stereotyping that's unintentionally outside of our awareness. You may have heard it before in social psychology. It's often called in social psychology implicit bias or unconscious bias. I prefer Joan Williams' term unexamined bias because it has the solution embedded in the term itself, which is to examine the bias. So we all are part of a collective imagination. We live in a sexist, racist society, and we've internalized that. When those stereotypes are activated, though, we have the opportunity to examine them and interrupt them before we apply them. So diversity in the workplace is references the groups that we belong to, the social identities that are meaningful to us and a source of identity. And a lot of institutions have diversity goals, but diversity goals aren't enough. We need inclusion. So diversity is sort of like bringing people from different social backgrounds to the table, but only allowing the dominant group members to speak. Whereas with inclusion, we not only value difference, we just don't tolerate them. We actually value them, and we work towards giving everybody the opportunity to celebrate these differences and contribute to the work that's to be done. When we refer to underrepresented groups, we mean people from groups who have been historically denied access and have faced steep barriers to leadership positions and structures of meaning and power, and it's particularly higher education in the US. And we mean women of all races and ethnicities, men of color, people with disabilities, and members of the LGBTQIA population. Microaggressions, I'm sure you know, are everyday acts of exclusion against underrepresented groups that are like death by 1,000 paper cuts. They can include interruptions, translations, misidentifications, active exclusion, and marginalization when your contributions are ignored. The Old Boys Network, and this is something that we found in our evaluation data that was one of the most significant things our students have learned from these case studies, is how the Old Boys Network works. And it's a form of informal system of friendship and support that men give each other from similar social backgrounds. And they can do that. This type of bonding happens in private fraternities or social clubs where people of color and women of all ethnicities are often barred from informally. And finally, cloning is when you want to hire somebody who looks like you, who has a similar social background like you, and somebody you feel like you feel comfort with, and that's a form of cloning. So you'll see many of these happening in the case you're about to read soon.
Colleen, there was a question in the chat. What was the name of the person that you mentioned came up with the term unexamined bias?
She is a lawyer at University of California, Berkeley. Her name is Joan Williams. And she wrote a phenomenal book called Unbending Gender, in which unexamined bias occurs. Thank you. Sorry, I can't see the chat while I'm.
It's good. That's what we're here for.
Okay. So not all of us here are members of academia. So I want to make sure that we are clear about the research grant that Michelle in this case study is working on. It's a career award that is administered by the National Science Foundation. And the National Science Foundation calls this their most prestigious competitive funding program in support of early career faculty. It's a 5-year investment in the faculty member's career. And it also provides financial support for the scientists to build a foundation for a lifelong role in leading scientific, innovative work. So it's an investment in the person's career, so it can really make a difference in someone's trajectory. If you wouldn't mind, please turning to page 9 of the facilitation guide. Here are some shortcuts that happen when evaluation settings are rushed and bias assessments of colleagues and employees and students can be reproduced. So we want to make sure that you understand these because you're going to see all of these in the case. And so be able to recognize them and interrupt them would be great. So snap judgments are when we make judgments about a person with insufficient evidence. And there's often a covert agenda in these snap judgments. Like, for example, having a relationship with the person or 2 or 3 degrees separation of that relationship and wanting to reproduce the old boys network. Good and bad fit are euphemisms for people's comfort level with other folks. So we want to always interrogate when someone says, oh, they're a good fit, which I just did in a faculty search last week. Negative stereotypes are characterized by presumptions of incompetence by people who are different from majority group members. And this can lead people to decide that a person from an underrepresented group is not capable of the position and therefore not hired. But positive stereotypes operate as like a halo effect with dominant group members and automatically presuming them competent. I like to call it the original affirmative action. And finally, 2 more things. Elitist behavior is also called by Joanne Moody, raising the bar, which is increasing the qualifications for underrepresented group members because their competency does not strike the evaluator as trustworthy. And finally, a term I've developed called euphemized bias, where I've heard this a lot in my ethnographic data, where members of dominant groups are evaluated on their potential, like he's got vision, he's a visionary, and a woman is only, or a person of color is often evaluated on their track record, but not their potential. And if I had a dollar for every time I heard he's a rock star in an engineering or science setting, I would be very well off because rock star is often a euphemism for someone's comfort level with the person. Does anyone have any questions about our key concepts or these evaluation shortcuts? I'm looking, I can't see the chat, so here we go. Okay, well, I'm going to move forward so we have time, make sure we have to stay on track with time here. So right now, I'd like you, please, if you could, to start with page 1 of the facilitation guide. And we're going to read the case together. We'd like you to take the next 4 minutes to read the case and start marking up, noting where you might see evidence of the key concepts we just reviewed or the evaluation shortcuts. So let's go ahead and take 3.5 to 4 minutes to read this case of Michelle and the grant proposal. We're going to take one more minute to finish up reading the case. Okay, let's come back together as a large group, please. And if you'd be so kind to turn to page 10 of your facilitation guide, this is where we're going to get into the activities of the case. So as Laureen mentioned at the beginning of our workshop today, that this is a truncated version of what we do with our graduate students who come to our workshops. So we are going to, if you look on page 10, activity 1, I'm just going to answer these questions for you. So the questions on page 10 are, who is the protagonist in this case study and at what stage of her career? Usually we have our students answer these just to prime them for their critical thinking skills and close reading skills. But today I'll just tell you, Michelle is a junior faculty member, as you probably already know from the case, in computer science and engineering. And she's applying for this National Science Foundation Career Award. The answer to question 2, who are our colleagues in the case and at what stages of their career? We have Kent, a senior faculty member in CSE, and he's also the CSE department chair, so he has a little bit more power than these junior faculty members. Brian is a junior faculty member as well, same stage of career as Michelle. He's also applying for a National Science Foundation Career Award. And the answer to question 3, what do both of these junior faculty members need from their chair, and how are their needs being addressed? Michelle and Brian both need letters of support, which is required for one of these career awards from Kent. It's you need a letter of support from your chair. So with that, we're going to move on to our small group activity, activity 2 on page 10 and 11. So what we'd like you to do is we're going to put you into small breakout groups. I'd like the person who woke up the earliest today to be the facilitator, just somebody who in your small group will take notes on your peers' comments, be a leader for inclusion, making sure everybody in your small group has a chance to contribute and weigh in on the questions. And finally, we'd like you to, the facilitators, to be the ones who report out when we come back to the full groups. So the questions you're going to be talking about in your small group activity, first, how would you, it's also on page 10, the very bottom of page 10, how would you assess Kent's behavior towards Michelle? Give specific examples from the case. If you turn to page 11, we really would like you to focus on question 3. Did you observe any biases or shortcuts? You're welcome to talk about question 2 as well, but we, in the interest of time, really focus on where are you seeing these biases and shortcuts. So Sarah and Bree, if you wouldn't mind putting folks into small groups, Lisa, Laureen, and I will be popping through these groups just to see how you're doing and see if you have any specific questions.
The rooms have been opened, so you should be seeing invites to rooms.
And can I join a group just to cycle through? I'm looking for the breakout room here.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
there we go. There we go. All right,
Okay.
I'll pop in there. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, wow, we have a lot of people today. That's great.
I'll stay put in the main room.
Okay. There's only one other person in room 3. Is it possible to? Maybe not.
Oh yeah. Do you want to move?
Oh, maybe Sarah, if you're going to join one, would you jump in there just so that person doesn't feel so alone?
Okay. Well, yeah, Lisa will join that one too.
Oh, good. Okay, terrific. I'll join
Yeah.
you too.
Okay.
So Bree, we had 3 breakout rooms. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, we talked about making it just 2 for your next breakout room.
Oh, that would be wonderful. That's
Yep.
wonderful. But I think what I'll do is I'll invite each breakout group to report out. That way we get a range of.
Yeah.
So if you could give me a heads up when you think everybody's back, I'd appreciate it.
I believe everybody's back now.
Oh, fantastic. Welcome back, everybody. And thanks for allowing me to just pop into your groups and listen to the wonderful conversations you were having. Let's bring those ideas to the large group here together, and so we can all learn from each other's wisdom. I'd love to hear from, let's start with breakout room number 2. I was wondering what your answers were, what some of your thoughts were about your assessment of Kent's behavior towards Michelle, if you saw any of the biases or shortcuts.
Who was in room 2?
Oh, sorry.
So I think we were in room 2. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So
ultimately.
all right. So I guess that's my team. So what was the question? What was
It's on the slide here. How would you assess Kent's behavior towards
Oh,
Michelle?
I'm
And
sorry.
did you see any bias or shortcuts happening?
Yes, our team definitely saw some bias in Kent's behavior towards Michelle, that we felt that Kent was not taking Michelle seriously, that there was definitely a lot. I'm kind of spanning questions 1 and 2 now, that there was contrast in body language.
Ooh.
And the use of the honorific as well, the way he spoke to Brian versus how he spoke to Michelle.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And some of the, I guess, specific examples have to do about asking about teaching and things like that, and wrapping up the meeting too soon with
Right.
Michelle.
Terrific. Thank you, Renita. How about breakout group 1? Did you have anything to add to breakout group number 2's assessment of Kent's behavior?
Yeah, let me parse through the notes that we took really quick. Yeah, I mean, Kent just seemed to be the worst at every juncture, right? That every opportunity, to belittle Michelle, but then give Brian a thumbs up and a pat on the back, and it's one of our group mentioned that even the compliment on teaching accomplishments felt really gendered, and that since that didn't speak to the research that the grant was focusing on, or belittling the accomplishments, right, or just changing the subject of, oh, they don't do that anymore, right, that's not really related to her success with it, or yeah, everybody else gets that too.
Right.
Anybody else from our breakout room want to share?
I think as far as the shortcuts, we identified almost all of them in the scenario. And so I really like that framing that we, were provided to look at it. So all the things.
All the things. And how about breakout group number 3? Did you see anything else that we could add here to round out our assessment of Kent's behavior towards Michelle?
Sure. We looked at the treatment from the perspective of Michelle was supposed to be doing all of the work, oh, here you write the letter, you do the digging, and Brian was more of a, given from Kent's perspective, and Kent's like, oh, let me know what I can do to help you. So there was a difference in where the amount of work was coming from and who was doing it and the treatment of that work.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. So I'm just going to open this up to all three breakout groups to see who just wants to weigh in. Breakout group number 2 mentioned, Renita mentioned Kent's behavior with Brian was more familiar and actually more respectful and more generous. But how might we also observe both men are behaving towards Michelle in different ways, but do we see any shortcuts or biases that we can find on page 7, 8, or 9?
I think the example as you read it, I mean, obviously a ton of bias comes through for Kent, but even for Brian, when he opened the door and saw someone sitting there, I just have to, in the back of my mind, it plays, if that had been a male, would he have just backed out and said, oh, sorry. Even if Kent had said, no, we're finished here. If Brian had seen another male, he'd say, oh, no, I'll come back later. And been a little bit more professional about it too, because it became very obvious from the way Michelle replied that no, they weren't done. We said, oh, we were about done, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Would Brian have taken that hint from a male as well and gone out of there versus sticking around for the handshake and the whole deal?
Yeah, that's a perfect spot in the case. It's on top of page 5, where the 2 men bond in front of Michelle. Is anyone seeing any of the either shortcuts or biases in that moment, the homosocial bonding there?
We have a comment in the chat from saying definitely old boys network, exclamation point.
Right. And you have Kent saying, as Renita mentioned, the honorific Dr. Davison or Mr. Davison, and then invoking another man about how they vied for his support or vied for him as a graduate student. Good. Anybody else?
I'm also seeing some unexamined bias throughout the scenario. I'm not sure if she's aware of this, but she's seeing herself as an outsider within the group. She's acknowledging, calling them gentlemen, being very formal with them. Even when she's saying goodbye at the end, they're not acknowledging her as in the same formal situation. They're not giving her the same respect, and she's still being very respectful to them throughout the entire situation, right? I know in my group, someone brought that up, like, the Kent referred to the professor very respectfully, but they just refer to her as Michelle. And so when she says goodbye, gentlemen, and they're like, just see you later, they're not giving her that same respect, but she's trying to stay very respectful to them the entire time. So, that she has that unexamined bias, that she's still trying to be very unintentional, but very aware that she's an outsider within that group. So we had that bias going on there. And then also just that she's trying to make sure that she's not speaking out or trying not to make a big deal, and trying to give him a way to acknowledge her paper, right? Or trying not to, come off as the aggressive woman, or trying not to say anything that's going to diminish her chances, maybe possibly later on, for getting this help. So when he says, oh, we're finishing up here, it doesn't seem like they've ever really got started to me, right? When he says, oh, you're going to have stiff competition, how does he even know they're going to have stiff competition? He's never even read the paper. He doesn't even know what her paper's about, So all of those things really are kind of biased in a lot of different ways. So it's just a lot going on there.
There is. And thanks for bringing our attention to some of the ways we might internalize that those biases that are external to us. So thank you, Christina.
We also have in the chat, someone mentioned cloning. And so, yeah, there's some good chat happening. So be sure to check that out.
The differential, yes, excellent. And definitely, yeah, some unexamined bias as well. Yeah, the old boys network, alive and well and kicking in this case. So let's go ahead and go back into our small groups. Bree and Sarah, you've mentioned you might just do 2 now, so we have about 6 or 7 people in each one. And we're going to take a stab at 2 more questions. You all are. And you can also find these questions in your student guide here on page 11. So how might you imagine Michelle's feeling, and what has she done well, and what could she do differently? So let's go ahead and take 3 minutes to discuss that. Then we'll come back together as a large group and we'll start talking about strategic planning.
So they're given 30 seconds now.
I'm sorry, what did you say, Sarah?
Oh, they're given 60 seconds, so about 10 seconds ago.
Perfect. Okay, great. So we'll do that. And then we have 1 more small group. So I will keep the report out here a little short. We'll go back to one more small group, which has a little bit more strategic planning. And then that will be the last small group. And then we'll come back together and have a conversation. I will prepare by sharing my screen right now.
Yep. Okay, we have participants coming back.
Terrific.
Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back. So a lot of times in our professional lives, we like to try to bifurcate our emotions and our activities in the workplace. But in the feminist work that we do, we think it's important to acknowledge our feelings because they can lead us to solutions. So I'd love to hear from anybody who wants to contribute. Facilitators, if you have your notes handy, that would be ideal, but I want to open it up to all. How do you imagine Michelle is feeling in the moment? Morgan?
Hi, I used the raise my hand function because I didn't know if someone was going to speak from the group. I feel like just from reading this, I can imagine how I'm feeling. Like I literally, of course, can feel how I'm feeling, and it doesn't feel great just reading it. And then in my group, we just talked about, well, what could Michelle have done differently? And I know from my standpoint in life, in the world, in academia, I think at times I don't even know what to do. So I imagine sometimes this person may have not known what to do. And then there's like so many other factors that go into play. And I'll speak for myself. Christina on here knows me, and Christina is the person I talk to a lot for help on what to do in situations. I went to grad school I started my program at 22 or 23. So there was like an age factor. I'm Black, and I have been hit with the angry Black woman narrative multiple times. There was just the regular, like, I don't know, battle between myself. Just, am I good enough to even be here? How am I don't know, like all of these things. So I don't know Michelle's age, race, gender, but when you put all of those different factors in, sometimes you feel like you don't know what to do. And that's just the feeling, like, what do I do? So you kind of shut down and you move on. You probably still feel really hurt, really upset. Yes, imposter syndrome. You probably still feel really hurt, really confused, but you just literally begin to shut down. And I know as a woman of color, I fight that a lot because in a lot of my past, that had been my coping mechanism. And it's not right, but it's just like, what do I do? So I shut down and move on. And I can imagine that may have been one of the feelings she felt in this moment, especially with her like, were we done? Oh, okay, I guess. And like, she just left. So that's what I imagine.
Thank you so much. And thanks for bringing intersectionality into this, that a white woman might respond differently than a woman of color, given, you know, the racism involved in the situation as well, and what white women can get away with more. Other folks about what Michelle is either feeling, what she could have done better, what she did well.
We actually struggled trying to come up with what she could have done differently. And I think the biggest challenge we talked about was that power imbalance. So, you know, how do you deal with this with the person being the department chair that has to write your letter? And we thought, you know, could you find someone else and work with someone else in the department? But that wouldn't work because he's the one that needs to write the letter. So we really actually struggled trying to come up with, you know, what could she have done differently?
Great. Well, that's something, the strategy that she can use going forward is something we're going to talk about next in a short, small group breakout. But in this moment, this very uncomfortable moment, as Morgan pointed out, of like feeling shutting down and feeling these two men bonding in front of her and feeling excluded. Is there anything that she did well that someone noticed?
I noticed that she didn't lose her cool.
Christina, did you want to share too?
And hard.
I was gonna say the same thing. She kept her composure. Like she said, kept her, you know, she stayed calm. She didn't allow them to control her emotions, right? And I think that's one thing that sometimes I might be victim of. Well, you made me upset, you know, and then some people might say, well, you can't, no one can make you do anything that you don't want them to. No, yeah, you can. But she allowed herself to be in control by saying, you know, gentlemen, or, you know, at the end. But I think that's something that she did well. So maybe she was in that reflective space and she was thinking about, well, what do I want to come out of this? You know, what do I want to get out of this? Maybe she was asking herself those reflective questions, because one thing that we were kind of asking in our group were, what is the true relationship between her and this individual? Is this the first time this event has occurred? Is this a pattern of behavior? Is this something that has happened between multiple women? If she was to speak out and be more direct, would that burn a bridge between her and this individual? And is that something that she's okay with at the time? And so really having a plan of action and being very reflective about what you want to happen in the future may be something that she might have to do independently and have an action for and come back to and address with that individual instead of just acting on the fly.
Brilliant. And that's exactly what we're going to do next. Thanks for the brilliant segue, Christina. We're going to take let's do another 3 minutes in our small groups and do exactly what Christina is suggesting that Michelle do, is take a beat and then prepare for her next meeting in her ongoing relationship with Kent. So I'd like you to talk about in your two breakout groups, how can Michelle prepare for her next meeting? Like, what does she need to achieve in order to advance her career? Maybe even coming up with some talking points Michelle can say to Kent to keep that next meeting on track. And what should she do? Who else should she go to for help if Kent keeps blowing her off? What other people might you suggest she go to for support? So I'll put you, Sarah and Bree will put you in the small breakout groups for another 3 minutes. And I'll see you back here shortly.
Yeah, and before I open the rooms, we had a great comment in the chat about survival tactic to not be pushed out, to stay in the conversation and hold your ground. So I'll go ahead and open the rooms.
Oh, thank you, Megan. That's a great tactic. So much. And Bree, if you want to talk further about brainstorming ideas, I'd be happy to meet after this or later next week.
Okay. I meet with I meet with Megan in like the first or second week in February. So I think I'll probably reach out to schedule something after that conversation to make sure I can even move forward with this.
Terrific.
I don't want to waste your time.
No, I'd love to help.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome back, everyone.
Wonderful. I can't wait to hear what everybody talked about in terms of the short-term strategic planning on behalf of Michelle and negotiating with Kent to get not only her letter of support, but also support towards her tenure package and such. So what did you discuss in terms of how she can prepare for her next meeting with Kent, and any talking points that she should raise?
Can I go? Because we went on a tangent and I think this is important. Okay, so our discussion in our group was really centered around understanding how to have the conversation and getting assistance in having that conversation. And one way to get that assistance is possibly utilize your organization's HR department. And in that discussion, our side discussion was that some of us are afraid to go to our HR department because we feel like that will come back on us. And HR might be you only go to HR if it is like a dire situation, because you might feel like you are ready to quit that job if nothing actually comes up for it, or if you do go, then you may have some type of backlash on you if you go to HR. And so that was like, we ended up talking about that more than the actual situation. So I didn't know how other people feel about that.
So don't go to HR, Christina, is that the takeaway?
No, that wasn't the takeaway. No, that's not what I'm saying. We were saying that one individual, Susan, said that she got some really good advice, some skills on how to work through your emotional state as you are, having these structured or crucial conversations with individuals, to make sure that you are being heard respectfully. However, Megan and I both expressed that we had been coached out of going to HR, and we felt like that was not a safe option. And so we wanted to hear from other people about that as a bullet point in learning how to have those type of conversations.
I just want to say that in the academia, going to ombudsman office, that's a level below going to HR, right? Because you can confine to them and ask for advice, because they work with, they're supposed to be, all confidential and safe space. And I mean, I've done it. I've gone when I had issue with my supervisor or my colleagues, and instead of like going to my boss's boss, I've gone to the ombudsman and, got advice on how to handle that. And if it didn't work, then, I went back again and got advice. It's sort of like your therapy at work, but not going to HR, because as everybody says, I'm afraid of, if you go to HR, it goes in your record. And if you need to do anything, changing job or anything, but that's not a good thing to have.
Thank you. Renita?
Thank you. Yeah. We touched on, you know, what could happen if you go above this person's head briefly, but some things that we also talked about in our group would be being more clear with your expectations with Kent. You know, asking before you meet that this is going to be an uninterrupted meeting, pointing him to this, you know, specifics of the career award, and just, you know, being explicit about what you need in the letter and things. I mean, you know, who knows if that would work, but it's something to try when working with someone like this.
Absolutely. Setting intentions, setting expectations before a challenging conversation is a brilliant idea. Anybody else, or should we?
We also have in the chat. So what about going to the Title IX office or Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion office for suggestions? And someone also added the subtle and insidious nature of Kent's behavior make them hard to refute outside of a one-on-one. Becomes a he said, she said.
Besides a more formal organization within the institution, did anybody discuss like a peer network or a different type of multiple mentorship method?
You know, we didn't talk about this in our group, but, and it's hard to know outside of the context of the scene that we see, but my first thing would always be to sit down with Kent and say, like, look, this is what I need from you. These are my expectations. This is how I like to work together. This is how it makes me feel when this happens. And it could be that he's just so unaware, right? Because of those unexamined biases. So that should like always be our first move. And then if he gets defensive, if he denies that happens, if he doesn't change, then you can take some more, you know, higher actions to get what you need. But you know, how we help coach people to have those conversations, you know, even if they need to have a trusted colleague come sit with them during that. And those conversations can be hard, but we need to learn how to have them, particularly as women in these fields.
Terrific. We have 17 minutes left. So what I'd love to do is, as a large group here, stay together and let's help Michelle strategize more long-term, looking towards not just the next 6 months when before the career proposals due, but how might she also prepare for tenure and also prepare for, if as you're supposed to do when you're thinking of applying for a career award, thinking 5, 10, 15 years down the line. So let's talk about, as a large group, how Michelle, and you can also find these questions on page 11 of your facilitation guide. How might Michelle go about building a collegial relationship with Kent and working with him over the next couple of years on her tenure package? This is about managing up. It's a skill. It's a skill, hard skill to build, but it's a muscle we want our graduate students in this program to practice.
One thing that was mentioned, and we mentioned in our group just barely at the start, is I really like Morgan's comment earlier about that she goes to Christina a lot for advice. I think if Michelle looks for other people in her group who have interacted well with Kent and goes to them for some advice too, and says, who in her peer network perhaps interacts well with Kent, and can she go to them to say, hey, I'd like to get some advice from you on that.
I like that comment by Susan, and even to leverage that further, something I've done is those people that interact well with Kent use them to advocate for you to Kent.
Brilliant. So you want to build allyship and get people to also toot your horn for you. Is that what you mean, Renita?
Yeah. Get them to do some of this lifting for you.
That's terrific. Great. Anybody else?
I think sometimes I've gained some ground if I'm treating it as like part of my intentional approach. So coming at it by saying, you know, this is important to me. This is my, I don't want to say, it's not exactly platform, but this is where I intend to direct. So making it you can help me along with this. Like I need to learn and grow with you. But it's important to my purpose. I'm going to have this in my tenure package, the difference I've made on account of gender, or I'm going to recognize. So just being very blatant about recognizing that this is in my purpose and you can help me and we can grow or learn together, because we don't necessarily know what this looks like. We're stomping new ground together.
Wonderful, Allie. Thank you. Other ideas?
I
We
think
also
one
had in
thing.
the chat. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No,
Chris.
go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah. We also had in the chat, Brian could have adjusted the behavior too.
Very good. So so she could use Brian as cultivate Brian perhaps as an ally. Is that what the intention of the chat comment is?
The person added he was complicit.
Yeah, which would make me not want to trust him, but maybe he could be
Unexamined
nudged.
bias.
Yeah, maybe he could be nudged into at least potentially as an ally. Yeah, good. Yeah, perfect. Okay. Anybody else before we move to our second question about long-term strategy for Michelle? Christina, did you have something you want to weigh in on?
Yeah, only thing that I was gonna say is their relationship may be new, and Kent's relationship with Brian may be a lot longer. And so they probably have a lot of commonalities that Kent and Brian already know about. Michelle may try, instead of always having the conversation focused on Michelle, Michelle can try to focus on Kent a little bit more to bring out what he knows and try to, bridge their relationship by trying to make sure she establishes that they have a lot of commonalities as well, right? To try to bridge up what they do have similar instead of playing off of what, that gender difference, right? Whatever the university did to pair them up as advisor and advisee had to be a reason for that relationship. And so establishing what those commonalities are between each other could play up to how they can build up that relationship a little bit better. And I think that would help in them kind of building that package together and having those more fruitful conversations.
Oh, that's wonderful. I think that's a really wonderful extension of what Allie was saying. Like, go to Kent as say, I want your mentorship. I want your help, and you're in a leadership position, and to help, and then leverage that into some bridging their relationship with some commonalities. I mean, I even did that with my chair. It was funny. I wrote this before I had a relationship with this male chair, and he was treating me very similarly. And I just brought his favorite beer to one of the parties, and then we were able to talk about home, crafted beers. that actually warmed the relationship, but it went a long way. Okay, thank you all. Those were brilliant insights. Our last question as a large group is about.
And sorry, we had one more in the chat.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that was someone else was thinking how to develop more of a relationship, go for coffee, lunch at a conference, etc. So those kind of like get out of the office types of ideas.
Genius. Yeah, that change of location definitely can warm a rapport for sure. Thank you, Leah. So let's talk about question number 2 about long-term career resilience with a professional support network. What are some long-term strategies that Michelle might use to establish relationship with other mentors, but also maintain them, rather than, have coffee once with somebody and then maybe how do you maintain that relationship long-term, maybe even long distance? Liesl?
Can I just sort of give a kind of a strategic framing to think through this question, which is around who is invested in her succeeding? And so outside of her immediate department chair, there will also be some sort of college structure, like there's some sort of hierarchy that she's operating in. And this institution has probably paid a lot of money to get her, right? They've probably put a competitive salary on the table, big startup packages, blah, 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 grant writing support and so on. And so when you look out across the landscape, there's going to be a lot of people who are invested institution-wide in her success and making allies out of those people. So for example, there'll be an associate dean or something for faculty affairs, right? That is responsible for bringing forward all the tenure cases and so on. And there may be, even at the department level, some sort of a vice chair or associate chair or somebody who is responsible for faculty affairs, who's responsible for research success in her unit, right? And so there'll be all these other people who have invested in her success other than her chair, that she might be able to make allies out of and get useful information from them about how to bolster her own success, maybe.
Terrific, brilliant, thank you. Other ideas? Or extending what Liesl just said? Allie.
On the point of extending what Liesl just said, sometimes I think we over obsess with allies, like wanting to have allies. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm saying that, like, even when we were thinking about how to get Brian, we were saying it as an ally, as though he doesn't also have a career and won't also have an influence, an absolute ability to change things. So extending Liesl's, I'm thinking about, some of the initiatives or the ways that the more forward ways of thinking in a university, even if it's not within your own department, because I think sometimes departments or department leaders are unaware, and then when they become unaware, they don't know what to do. So having some of the institutions or the programs or the things that are working in that direction, I think it can be helpful to say, to include that. So I'd like to work with this, or it's okay, this is new to me too. Let's turn to our resources that can help with this. So this is obviously not the first time we've had a female grad student or a female person go up for a career, or if it is, then even more importantly, so this is the first time we're doing this. What do we not know? So kind of including it. I know that that's allyship in many ways, but I'm just saying, instead of just always relegating somebody who can't get it to allyship, I think it's important to also relegate them, like put them in the you're also growing and learning position. We're growing as a department. We're becoming better as a unit.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, I love that framing. That's a great reframing. Thank you. Before we move on to our next slide, does anyone have any last minute inputs or want to augment what Allie or Liesl just said? Okay, so thank you so much for participating in this process, and you can see a little bit about what we've been able to offer to several hundred graduate students. I'm going to just note that, again, this is part of National Science Foundation grant, that specifically the research trainee program. And my other colleagues who could not be here today are Nancy Schiller and Dr. Glenn Abett, and I'm going to turn it over to Liesl.
Thank you, Colleen, and thanks to everybody for the great discussion. I really enjoyed it. I just want to make one really important point, which is that the NAVIGATE project, and you just got a little taste of it, but actually it was interesting for me to hear that the discussion that you had was really kind of akin to the discussion that we hear when we do the same case with graduate students, right? This feeling of frustration on the behalf of the protagonist that she's going through this, and also the brainstorming on how she can be strategic in managing her career. And our goal and our objective, as Colleen said, actually I think Laureen said at the beginning, is really to support women to be persistent in their careers, even when they do come across circumstances like this. And I'm a provost at a pretty big university. I want to be really clear that in no way does this work excuse bias or hostile workplace behaviors, right? And it absolutely doesn't take away from the responsibility of the institution to address those biased and hostile workplace behaviors. And that is not what we're trying to suggest at all. But I will tell you, as an administrator and an academic and a leader in an academic situation, and I will also say that I spent 16 years in Silicon Valley working in very large companies before I came back to the academy. What often happens is that women who experience these kinds of hostile or adverse conditions don't know what to do with them and get pushed off their career paths without really ever getting support or help or figuring out a strategy that would enable them to persist. And so our goal is to try and have people think ahead of time before they're in a difficult situation about how to strategically manage those situations, which is why the program targets graduate students or early career professionals particularly, right? So we want to have them prepared and having thought through, there are strategies that we can probably think about that will help us to be persistent in our career goals so that we don't get deterred from going after our big ambitions. Next slide, please.
We had a question in the chat, so whenever one of the presenters can get to that as well.
This case, yeah, the case study is already available. And if you go to, can somebody, oh, there we go. Sarah already put the NAVIGATE Project web link back in there. Thank you, Sarah. You were faster than me. There's 9 out of our 10 cases already fully published, and you can just download them straight from our webpage. One is still waiting for me to finish up the final reviewer edits and get it out online. But it'll be up in, within a week or so. And
Lisa, by the way, Lisa, I'm sorry, I was sharing my screen, but I went to the link and it says that our website does not offer April case yet. So I think we just need to flip the switch on the back end there.
Oh, for Michelle?
No, for April and the April case, which I know we finished.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So that's weird. Okay. We'll have to look at that one.
Yeah.
That's clearly a problem on our end. Oh, wait a minute. Now I can see. Okay. So we gave a 2-page handout today. Did that get shared out already? Or is it on that Google link? I can't remember. I'll wait for somebody to do that. There's a 2-page summary that just talks about each of the cases and what they address. But importantly, what we want everybody in this room to know is anyone can facilitate these cases. There's really detailed teaching notes about how to do it. And each is timed to deliver in about a 1 hour or 45-minute session, and that we really welcome your feedback. Colleen, were you going to drop that feedback link in the chat window, maybe? And then, we've got 2 minutes. Has anybody got any other questions that we didn't get to?
Well, while people are thinking, I'm going to drop in some information about these workshops and where people can view these. And if you're interested in being a host of a workshop and being a presenter here, we'd love to have you. We are taking submissions currently, and be sure to follow our YouTube channel and Twitter. So
excellent.